Welcome back to Night School 2026. Don Juan Cantos 6, 7, and 8, as well as the dedication and the preface. Dedication to 6 through 16, preface to 6 and 8. Back with me, Jesuit educator Daniel Babcock, and public school teacher and podcast extraordinaire, I'll add, Wes Chance. Gentlemen, it's good to be back with you, and I'm happy to be sailing on this ship of Theseus, hopefully not ship of fools, alongside you as we get to about almost ish the halfway point of this poem, perhaps even farther, actually, if we look at actual content.
And we get a battle.
We get a battle, we have a harem.
We
We
moved
saw
to
the harem
Russia.
last time, but we see more of it this time. This, and apparently it's based on a historical battle during Catherine the Great's time, and one of the generals, or at least on the Russian side, was famous for having defeated Napoleon in 1799. I'm pretty fresh on this because I read the preface not very long ago, and that's right up there. But Wes, last time you had expressed a little bit of interest in doing some meta commentary and taking a look at the dedication and the preface. I didn't know if you were still interested in that. I brought up in the pre-show and feel like I should and think I should say that in the Penguin edition that Babcock and I are using, the dedication comes right at the end of Canto 5, and the only way to see that it's not part of Canto 5 is that the number appended or at the top of the stanza, I suppose I can actually show you this, is not there for this one. So it just blends in, really. It looks like another stanza until one notices, oh, there's no 160 there. And then looking at the table of contents, oh, there's supposed to be a motto, sorry, not dedication, motto to Cantos 6 to 16. And then it's this bit of dialogue from Twelfth Night. And conversation. And so, dost thou think because thou art virtuous, there shall be no more cakes and ale? Yes, by Saint Anne, and the ginger shall be hot in the mouth too. Twelfth Night, or what you will.
Yeah, the edition I have is from, I'm trying to look at this right now. It's taking some time to load, but it is from Jason B. Smith and Company, 1859.
Mm.
It has original notes and a Life of Byron by A. Cunningham Esquire, and many illustrations on steel, published in Philadelphia, Lord Byron's Don Juan. It's from the library of Reverend W. R. Harris, and it's in the University of St. Michael's College Library. This is where it was digitized from anyway. Um, and it's an inferior edition. I will own that, but I also didn't buy the book, so there's that. I have a lot of books,
Uh,
but this, like I said, is not one of them. And my edition has the Twelfth Night thing at the very start, unless it was a different one. Yeah, it's at the very start of everything, before a general dedication to the poem as a whole. And so the editors have made some choices here, I guess, and done some different things. I don't know that there is really that much to say once you actually read the stuff leading into 6, 7, and 8. I was more saying like I think that makes sense as a unit to read together since they seem to have been grouped that way by the poet. And his commentary there is mostly about like stuff that was relevant at that time, to do with like the reception of the poem, I guess, and the battle that he's basing some of this on. But I didn't find it super insightful, or maybe I just didn't read it carefully enough. But the Twelfth Night bit I do think is pretty important, however, because it seems to be his kind of shorthand for, look, I'm gonna write this how I want. I'm gonna enjoy myself. I'm doing me. I'm Lord Byron. He's kind of a cool customer, and I think he is entitled to do as he wishes because he is a pretty great poet and had a very interesting life from what I can tell. But I think his dedications, his notes on his work there, are probably not as illuminating as just kind of jumping into the poem. But yeah, there's something you wanted to look at there. I'm happy to look at it once I
Well,
find it.
excuse me, it's that dedication. Um, I think it changes meaning, or not, maybe not meaning, but it changes impact if you think about it as coming after he's already published some of this, or if it's
Hmm.
before like anything has even been said, right? So if it's after he's published something, and then that coupled with this preface, they have a slightly different like nobody's getting what I'm saying. You're all taking this
Hmm.
in the wrong way. Um, England, which is, on its way to becoming, the classic, it's not quite yet. Victoria's not even the queen yet. It's still the Regency era here, but it's getting towards that prudish Victorian, uh, puritanical that we think of
Hmm.
with, Dickens and the Bronte sisters and, what we think of it. And then later when we get to Wilde and Stoker. But, you know, I love a good, it's always entertaining to read from somebody who thinks of themselves as being the victim of oppression and
Hmm.
censorship and moralizing and all this. Adds a layer of metafiction, but he seems to be having fun with it. Like I don't think he takes it too
Hmm.
any of this too seriously, his own work or this commentary. I think it helps that he's all the way in Italy when he's writing this. He's
Yeah.
not at home.
Yeah, he compares himself to Socrates and Christ, but
Right.
kind of in jest, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, he ends that last bit of but it would be well if the adherence to the classes from whence the persons sprung should abate a little of the cant, which is the crying sin of this double dealing and false speaking time of selfish spoilers. And dash, but enough for the present. Like, he's calling everybody out, he's including himself. This is all a joke. I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with what both of you are saying, and I like your addition from the preface to the motto, Babcock. It does seem like our editors have done a little studying and figured out that the motto and the preface should be in the middle, precisely because the preface clearly is referring to readers who have read the first several cantos of this work, and so it would seem that those were published first, maybe like a Dickens or
Hmm.
Dostoevsky being serially published
Yeah.
in order to gauge interest. But like he says in the motto, that there's going to be fun. There are going to be cakes and ale from here on out, as well as ginger. And when he compares himself to Socrates and Jesus, perhaps a little bit hyperbolically. He
and Voltaire.
I mean, he'll compare himself to a lot of people, Dante, Cervantes, later, as well as Swift, great, great satirists in some ways. Um, but he's suggesting that people that he is being called a blasphemer.
Yeah.
That what he's putting forward is corrupting literature, and it's almost like what he's doing here is making a stand in the same way that Cervantes opens the question in Don Quixote. In Don Quixote, Cervantes really asks the question: what is the value of reading adventure tales and literature? Not yet called novels, then, because it drives the protagonist crazy, and he loses his critical faculty because of that. Here, um, Byron seems to be arguing for a freedom of his pen to match the freedom of his acting in life. That, yeah, you can call me a blasphemer, but lots of people who freely write have been called that, who have made an important impact. And so, in the same way that he'll sort of himself fight against the Turks um, in Greece, he is fighting for his right to represent what he wants in this poem form, in this fictional form, in this heroic form. And so not only does he seem like, as a person, wanting to be a libertine and fight against any sort of restrictions. But though he has restricted himself in this 8-line sort of satiric epic format, with a specific rhyme scheme, he does seem to be saying, well, it's his privilege as an author to say whatever it is that he wants.
He's also, I think we've maybe missed this bit that he opens these cantos with these lines, not every single one, but a lot of them with
I was going to go to that next, right, where he just trails off.
paraphrase. Yeah, but they're famous lines, right? Canto 6 is in Caesar. He's got these like mock incantations going on throughout. Yeah, I mean he's clearly, got the like a comedic delusion of grandeur going on a bit. Um, setting the scope of his project as being this grand epic. Um, and I mean, in some ways, he's meeting the moment. It just feels a little like Don Juan, the character, is not really all that impressive. Like, well, I don't think he hasn't done anything.
Yeah, well, he's a great lover. There's that. Um, but aside from that, well, now he's going to have some glory in war, right? So that was what was That's what he tells us. This is what I promised you at the start. What I feel like we lack is the internal, right? The the psychological, I guess you might call it, right? We don't see a lot in that sense from Don Juan, which is surprising to me because of the personality that's producing this and the time in which it's happening, the context and everything. It seems like that was something I was expecting, and it's not. You know,
Uh, um, yeah. So I mean, Alex, you could talk more about this, but I'm thinking of the evolution of the epic, and they, except for Beowulf, they all seem to have a more interiority to them. Like we get from Odysseus's perspective, we get his thoughts and feelings. We get Virgil, we get Dante. Beowulf a little less so. There's some, but not much.
There we could really scrutinize epics and try and see a lot in them, but in some ways they really are. It really is a medium of exteriority, a medium of action. Dante's a little different, um, but he is mostly acting. It is, I think, similar to drama in that respect, that the plot and the action, to some extent, to a large extent, show us the thoughts and the intent of the characters. But something Wes said made me wonder, another hypothesis, whether we don't get the interiority of Don Juan, perhaps because of the sort of epic conventions, but also because we are getting the interiority of Lord Byron.
Hmm.
And
the narrator.
and he, like Nabokov with Ada, one wonders whether he conflates himself with his character. And so when he shares his own authorial thoughts on existence, on himself, on writing, perhaps in his mind, in his narrative voice, he considers that both belonging to him and his character. But that said, yeah, no, I don't. One correlate I might add to what Wes is saying is that sometimes with interiority comes self-reflection and therefore growth or transformation. When you can see somebody's inner thoughts, it's sometimes easier to see whether they've transformed as an individual. Though I don't think that's a perfect way of understanding. Someone can think something and be wrong about themselves, and I think often people are. But in some ways, the plot throws this character. Now he's finally getting thrown into some interesting stuff, right? He had his wife character. She died, sadly. Now he met sort of a pirate lord. Now he's been sold into slavery. Now he's escaped from slavery. We're not really told how, with several other people. We're not told really who, except for this guy Thompson and maybe the person who first bought him, the eunuch, some eunuch. And now he's fighting in this major conflict, sort of like Cervantes, sort of like Dante, both known to have fought in major conflicts. The Battle of Lepanto for Cervantes. and the battle in which Manfred actually died for Dante's case. In fact, some think he actually killed a man there. But I don't see Don Juan growing a ton. I don't see him developing. This is not Bildungsroman so far to me. This is not like a novel in that respect. I think that's something kind of interesting about the Iliad, right? At the end of it, perhaps one does see Achilles transform, and also the nature. Uh, I don't know. Even society, Priam for the first time is kissing the hands. There's something happening for a first time there, and there are some major firsts that it ends with, and so a lot of transformation didn't seem to be occurring the vast majority of the work, and then does at the end, and maybe that's part of its greatness. But here I agree. I see cool things happening. I'm entertained, but the author seems to have fallen to the background, and Don Juan, right? He feels like a placeholder, like a link or a chrono, like a silent protagonist that's just kind of going through and is what a vehicle for our own experiences at this point.
That's an interesting comparison to the protagonist in a video game, in an adventure game, right? Because he like in the Canto 8, I just remember this one detail where the general or some military leader, I'm blanking on who it was, is kind of like going through and saying like, oh, here's this Jack Johnson character, here's these other characters from the harem, and then here's this person I can't tell if it's a man or woman. There's no beard on his face, right?
He was neither male nor female. It was something like that.
Yeah, and it's which is interesting, given some of our previous conversations about this character, but also that, like I don't think he's lived for 10 years in the experience, but I mean, he's traveled quite a ways and had quite a few adventures. You'd think that at 16, if he is at the beginning, he's grown, even if it's a year or two. Like that, when you're 18 to 16, there's a big difference. So but he seems to be static. He seems to have no real, and he's had some pretty profound things happen to him.
Yeah, yeah. It might be uh, the eunuch that they're talking about there. If I
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
remember,
yeah, it may be.
Sure. Yeah. Let me see if I can find that. That's true.
but to your point, like,
It doesn't really change
yeah,
my overall
Yeah,
impression of June.
yeah, exactly, exactly. It does seem like the one thing I'd point out, which seems to be a big deal, is that he saves the child from the pile of dead
yes,
Yes.
bodies,
yes.
right?
Yes.
That is remarkable, and people are impressed by that, and that seems to represent some sort of change, possibly, or at least we're seeing something new emerge, which we haven't had occasion to see before about June. Which I connect back to things that the poet had said earlier. Like the narrator says something like, thank goodness I don't have a kid that I have to raise and educate because that's a big, that's really difficult." Um,
Sorry, Wes.
and that again might be ironic. No, no, I take it to be like a little bit winking, like, yes, Byron did have a lot of affairs, and like, many of that era, he was considered a great libertine and sort of a difficult and dangerous person as a result. But also this was part of his whole mystique. And I think, well, there's stories about some particular people, like Ada Lovelace, I believe, is supposed to be his daughter. So Lovelace of the great,
Yeah.
generation of
Computational.
computers
Yeah.
programming and all that. Yeah, with Babbage. I'm pretty sure that he is her father, and doesn't he's not involved in her life in any way, but that certainly like sets her on a kind of trajectory of like, you know, this is a lot to live up to, this father, and I could have that wrong. I could be apocryphal, but um, it's just to say like in some way his child is the poem, right? His poetry is his progeny. This is something Montaigne says about his essays, and great authors, I think, rightly sort of make that decision a lot of times to either um, go and have a conventional life or have a more bohemian and a more creative and an artistic life. And it is interesting to see Juan then within the poem uh, rescue this child. Presumably, there's going to be more about this later, and we'll see what kind of choices he makes with respect to his responsibility to that child.
Well, he tries to claim to be the parent. He says this child is parentless, so therefore she's mine, right?
Hmm.
Um, and there was another scene of father. Isn't there a dude who had a bunch of sons die in the battle too with them?
Yeah, right. Like five of them
Yeah,
die in front of him. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was just harkening back to this motif of fatherhood
yeah.
that's been playing throughout.
Hmm.
Oh, here we go. It's the face. So Canto 100 is where he has the child, and then on the facing page, Canto 104, 105 is where the guy with the five sons are.
Hmm.
Um, and Jack Johnson seems to claim Jewin as not so much a father figure, but like a protege or like a Patroclus Achilles relationship. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be
Hmm.
romantic, but
Maybe.
there's a sense where Johnson says he loved him in a certain way.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Johnson is himself one of what, like 50,000? It's some absurd number. It said in the military there are only there are two prominent names. One is
Yeah.
Johnson, and then yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Ah, you two gentlemen have said a number of interesting things, and so I might have to really collect my thoughts here. But the saving of the child is a really interesting motif because it's set in this moment of epic attempt at numerical grandeur and numerical extravagance. Uh, it sound I would have to look at the text specifically, but it says something like multitudes or thousands or tens of thousands of people are dying. This is a huge battle. And so it is supposed to describe and seems to describe some Oriental excess on both sides, Russian and Turk, in terms of how many barbaric individuals can be fighting against each other. Particularly, the Turks are barbaric to Don Juan. But the Russians are too, in that they occupy a large land, have a large population, and can bring a giant population to bear as an army. And in fact, a little sub comment I'd like to ask, especially because you two are readers of War and Peace, and particularly you, Babcock, we read it together with Justin. Is there? It's funny how the Russians get described. Tolstoy seems to suggest that all history is determined to some extent, and that our agency is greatly inflated in our minds, and that even great characters have very little agency, and in fact, perhaps the least. I see that potentially as orientalizing and suggesting that the place I come from is so big and there's so much going on that nobody can everybody is an ant, and nobody really because of the multitudes of people and the largeness of the place from which I come, my perspective is just that humans really can't do much versus this sort of orientalism of countless bodies dying and countless individuals being there, which is connected also to the epic motif of a big battle, and always, of course, of outdoing in terms of size and scope those from before. So, like, you have a really tall devil in the Divine Comedy, and then the devil in Paradise
Paradise
Lost
Lost.
has a shield that's as big as the moon, basically, and a
Hmm.
spear or that it reflects the moon as if it's the moon, and a spear that's like larger than absurdly long.
Hmm.
And so okay, so
Poetic one-upsmanship rather than
yeah, no,
actual.
no, and that's
Yeah.
that's part of it. And so in
Yeah.
order not simply to imitate, but to innovate, one needs to up the scale. And so it goes from the world scale to the galaxy scale. You see this in anime and in video games too, when they try and upscale their characters to
Right.
fight against new enemies. They end up having to fight against gods. And in fact, there's an anime that makes fun of this where they're like space mechs, like Gundams, and one is the size of a galaxy. And so and so the epic poets run into this problem. Perhaps we have to get into the infinitesimal now.
Hmm.
But that's sort of like my first series of statements, maybe point, maybe question. But my other one with the saving of the child is in the wake of this, in this war, like Socrates, who was known to keep his head and to conduct himself just as he normally did in Athens, even during war. Alcibiades tells these stories during the symposium when he comes in drunk.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
is Don Juan in some way making a claim again? And we get a lot of mention of the Muslims and the Muslims, and this makes me wonder whether this is part of the Orientalizing. The Easterners were also the Muslims, and this is to him a less civilized religion that he has to fight against. It's not a crusade, but it's very similar.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and you know, these different peoples fighting against each other. It's easy to project the same things. You're the orcs, as it were. But even in the wake of all this bloodshed between these two peoples, neither of whom are his, the Russians nor the Turks, even if he's Spanish, not English, still the same. He maintains his morality, or some sort of superior morality, even to a religious one. So the Russians, some of them are called Cossacks. Those are Orthodox Christians. And then they're fighting against Turks who are Muslims. This Don Juan would seem to be a Catholic, if he's Spanish, Protestant, if he's English, but definitely not Orthodox nor Muslim. And so, at the most, he's Catholic indifferent. But I wonder if he is libertine indifferent, like how Wes was laying out, that he doesn't need, in the same way that he doesn't need your moralistic telling him not to stop blaspheming. He doesn't need a religion to tell him how to act, even in the midst of a bloodthirsty battle.
I mean, I wonder about the mentions of the different peoples there, and the way that we see the Russians. There's an allusion to Kuznetsov, or whatever his name is, that's like
Mm-hmm.
the big general against Napoleon,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's like a funny anecdote about him like falling in a ditch or something. I don't know. It's odd. But it certainly seems like there is some kind of contrast being drawn between the, yeah, massive scale and the number of people, and like all these people dying, right? And then like the focus on
The
our
child.
hero, our man Don Juan, and you know, his yeah, exactly, his connection with, his ability to connect with people around him. And I think we have to assume that we aren't told how they escaped exactly, that I recall, but we have to assume that it has to do with his power over the Sultana, right? Like that she, once she realizes she can't seduce him, she just kind of either loses interest and he's able to escape, or she actively helps him escape. It's that's how I kind of understood like what happened there at the end of that scene. But
Canto 6 and 7. Yeah.
That's very
yeah,
kind
to go from,
of you that he just didn't care to even tell us, and sort of a Cervantes-esque move. And the same way that he
right.
wanted to finish quotes for us. He's like, and I don't care about that anymore. Moving
And
on.
now he's in Russia.
I promised you war. Let's go.
But I do think that's a good reading. I didn't notice it, and I thought I had missed it, and then I looked into it, and apparently it's just not there. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's an astute hypothesis itself. Perhaps he thought we would just figure it out and didn't feel the need to lay it out for us. But so
I'm more of Wes's mind that the commentary on the people's fighting is more just to give the grand scale in order to contrast with the personal of Don Juan, to put him in this epic battle. And to give him a moment of heroism in saving this child.
It's strangely Iliadic. In the Iliad, there are there aren't as many people dying as we would think, knowing modern warfare, right? The scale of death now compared to in the Iliad is tremendous. But remember, like during these large fights from like books 11 to 16, there would be these moments of one-on-one battle, or that strange moment where Glaucus and Diomedes start talking and then apparently can exchange armor. Like,
Yeah.
that's that. How long does that take? And so yeah, I agree. And so we're getting the Russians, the Tartars, the English, the French, the Cossack, La Rochefoucauld, Socrates, Dante. The epic mentions and listing continues. And mentioning and listing the numbers of people that fight is goes back to the Aeneid and Iliad. Book two of the Iliad is so boring to read because it's the catalog of ships. And you have to read about like 1,149 or so ships and where they came from. But yeah, so that that's interesting from an identity perspective too. There are so many of these identities forming a whole, and yet at the individual level is where you find humanity, irrespective of the number of peoples and their languages and their cultures and their beliefs. They can still all as a whole sort of be a barbaric beast, fighting to fell this other barbaric beast. It's not that any one people are bestial. It's that when they come together in order to battle, they occupy the place and action of a beast. But Don Juan has some humanity at this individual level. I mean, it almost makes me wonder, as a romantic, and I've been thinking a lot about Nietzsche and Rousseau as we've talked, talking about Montaigne as well, and living and calling one's works one's children. This is something Nietzsche did as well. And Rousseau obviously gave up his children to orphanages where they died young, rather than raising them. And it's basically contemporaneous. But is society, is any social grouping denigrating or de-individuating of a human's humanity? If one is going to find morality, I could be totally off on this for sure. There's just like a Johnny hypothesis, middle of seminar hypothesis, as it were. But if it is nature, if one is born not with original sin, it's an anti sort of Christian Enlightenment view, but it is society which corrupts us, then which society? Any society, perhaps? And so if one is going to be human or moral, it's going to be on the individual, asocial, not because you are, an X or a Y or a Z, except for the fact it's just that you are a human. I'm forgetting what the nation that the girl comes from, but it's a girl rather than, that makes sense. But he's a guy, and so, potentially different from him. And so this is a cosmopolitan act, or this crosses boundaries. But again, I may be way off base.
Well, I think there's something to be like, if we backtrack and we have this claim that the narrator and or speaker and or Byron himself is the epic hero of the work, and Juan is really just an accident of that, maybe an avatar of that at certain points that the speaker, Byron, narrator can embody. So that's one point. The individual versus society, the way that Lord Byron has had his own life shaped by the morals of the society around him that have told him that he himself is wrong, sinful, etc. And he's just perpetually escaping, trying to live in this way that is, I think, you're right to bring up a Rousseau, right? This kind of like man in the state of nature kind of way. I can kind of, that thesis can track that there's these nations congealing around him to become these two bodies that are going to fight in this completely chaotic battle that is going to, we see contrastingly, orphan a small girl child and then kill an entire family. So like Byron, he starts off with his prologue or preface rather, where he talks about like, you ministers are out there saying about how evil and sinful my work is. Well, this is what society is. Like, you look at what you do.
This is
exactly
what you
right.
think. Yeah, right.
Like you're saying no good British man would ever write such a thing. Like, what good has Britain done me? England may have made me wealthy, but it hasn't provided me with any real moral background.
I mean, especially at this time, this I wouldn't say the height of English power, but England, Britain, it was Britain was very much an imperial power at this time, early
Oh
19th.
yes. Oh yeah. I mean, this is right
Something.
before the sun ever sets on the British Empire, right? I mean, this is like on the cusp of Victorianism.
Yeah, and that's not the yeah. Hmm, hmm. And that's not the only nation too, but right. So that is an interesting thing to say. Who are you to say that my words are doing so much harm where you do actual harm to not only other people's but your own, right? Because it it's people on your own side who can be killed and have their families killed as well as the enemies.
I
And
mean,
so
this is a tale as old as time, and him putting a
as we know,
dialogue, right, and him putting a dialogue between Toby and the fool or a fool character as his dedication here. It's also, that is also on point to this motif of pushing back on critics of his artistic expression.
Yeah, I, I guess with his freedom to leave England and go to the continent and Italy in particular, um, it does seem like he is interested in the uh, possibility of some kind of cosmopolitan reformation of in the sense of like a political change, right? Um, Obviously, he is not getting into any kind of specifics with that, and again, from what we can see, he's much more interested in depicting um, private scenes and things that would be appropriate to an epic, but also things that would sort of look towards the novel. Um, I think it's a really interesting point how by the end of the Iliad and then between Iliad and Odyssey and then onward from there, a lot of what the epic is doing over time is like showing us different forms of heroism, right? Different heroic ways of being and how those kind of get metamorphosed in the different works is, I think, extremely like to this discussion of, um, well, we wanted to have a war, right? Well, what does war look like now, right? The difference between war in the Iliad and then war in um, Don Juan, and once you have uh, modern weaponry, what that's like. And yet there's this yearning among the Romantics and specifically Byron too, this yearning to return to some kind of pre-industrial world, right? That's pretty close to the heart of the poetic movement of Wordsworth and Coleridge, and then by extension these slightly younger Romantics. And I think there's a passage somewhere in here about Daniel Boone in Kentucky, right? And
Oh yeah.
uh his like posse or what his little crew, and he like kind of dwells on that for a while. It's like there is a way in which he yearns to have it both ways, right? He wants to have civilization with all its, splendors, um, and yet he wants to have like undisturbed nature, um, the beauty of the natural world, but also just sort of the innocence and the lack of uh, sophistication. And so I do find it interesting this tension between like our character Juan and our speaker, the narrator. Um, it's really hard to tell what Juan really wants. He's just kind of like at the mercy of stuff happening to him. He seems to just want to stay with the woman, and then that just can't happen because of the character that he is. Like that's the fundamental problem is that Byron chose this character because he didn't want to have to start in the middle of events, right? He wanted to get to depict the whole sweep of this life, and this life is on a certain trajectory, and it does not involve staying with a woman, right? Um, so I just think there's something strange about um, yeah, him in this epic mode, yet more interested in sort of love affairs, I guess you'd say, basically, right? Um, and then also his choice of a character being one who is apparently just sort of at his mercy, and he gets to, throw him into war without really explaining how he got out of slavery. Who knows what he'll do next after this, right? He doesn't even seem to know himself what he's going to do next. Um, but what Byron seems to want, yeah, is also this kind of paradoxical thing of I want to be able to write great poems. I want to be able to be involved in the great conversation, the great epic tradition, and yet I also want to mock it. I want to reform my society in some sort of vague way. I want to return to nature, right? It's it's a whole kind of almost buffet of desires that any one of which would be plenty to keep someone occupied, right? But he's just got this all embracing kind of energy that he's going after everything at once.
Well, you I think aptly point out this contradiction that is inherent in many, if not all, of the Romantic poets, which is the tension between the um, fight against civilization or expression that civilization is corrupting people, but also a desire for civilization in this pure way.
Yeah.
Like nationalism is a huge motif. This idea of like the nation state having some kind of, I don't know, purity, innocence to it that that must be defended, such that Byron himself is going to, war for an Italy of some kind, or Greece rather. But he also, gets involved in Italian politics. Um, Byron doesn't have, at least in this work, maybe in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, you see it a little bit more, but I don't see much of the romantic, retreat into nature. Um, but I do feel that tension of the individual versus society versus nation. Like, I was thinking as you were talking about this, how there's this collection of the nations fighting, and it's essentially Christianity versus Muslim. It's a crusade, is what the
Yeah.
battle is. I mean, they're not going for Holy Land, I don't think. I mean, maybe they are, and maybe that's how he got out of slavery. But anyways, so I wonder if he's pushing the sense of the like nations are good individually, collections of nations are not good. Like a nation defending its own borders or its own identity or its own people or its own land, that's one thing. But empire building is problematic. Um, and he mentions Robespierre. He mentions Boone. You're right to mention Boone is uh, on Canto. Where did it go? 61. General Boone, backwoodsman of Kentucky, was happiest amongst mortals anywhere. Um,
Mhm.
So, Babcock, you're making me really okay. I have two what I think are very interesting thoughts, and one might just be a note, but in the same way that and so this connects with what Wes is saying too. Wes mentioned that Don Juan just seems like he's at the mercy of.
yeah,
This
he's like
reminds me a lot.
Slothrop.
It reminds me quite a bit of the Aeneid, where Aeneas is basically at the whim of poor Virgil, and it's almost like a punishment that he's his protagonist. It's pious Aeneas, but we're first introduced to him when he's feeling heavy cares from having lost men at sea after having lost Troy, where he lost his wife. He's a heavy character, and he's a character who's pushed by fate. And so he has very little say in what he has to do. Very famously, this doesn't get him out of a terrible argument with Dido when he says that. He's like, well, the gods told me I have to leave. Like, that's not going to cut it. But this also, so the battle, there are details, including its name, that are escaping me right now, that occurs between the Turks and the Russians. It's because the Turks had recently taken over some military installation. of the Russians.
Mm.
And so this is very Caesarian. The reason that Caesar goes through the Gauls in the way that he does in the Gallic Wars, or the Gallic War, excuse me, that's something people get wrong. They call it the Gallic Wars. It's the Gallic War. They just like revelation, not revelations. Only one revelation. And that's the point. Is that he used a military defeat to the Gauls from 30 years before as an excuse to engage. And so here we also see that Roman-esque mechanism in place, that because part of our nation, an installation dedicated to its defense, was taken over, it's necessary to act. And so, like with a crusade, if one sees, I'm really stepping out on a limb here, if one sees the nation as it's funny coming from our perspective where we do not see it like this. We do not have a romantic perspective towards the nation state. We see it as besmirched as anything human related. But if the nation state is pure in its intention, then it is in some ways morally superior to even a religion, which all religions at this point have been shown to be smeared in blood to some extent. But if the nation state has not yet smeared itself in blood, which it has beyond any religion at this point, right? Our own in particular, the United States, millions and millions of people. But then serving the nation in a war that is de facto or de jure just, because it is pristine. It was attacked by this other version of it, but which is by definition bad or evil because it's not the same thing, and it hurt, the pristine good thing, which is your nation state. Then it's almost like an attempt by the Romantics, and I guess there's some wordplay here, to be Roman in their polemical politics and their perception of their foreign relation. It's almost like war is, this is like a Nietzschean romantic point, is itself a perfectly natural thing in a way that writing can never be in that way. In the way that it's a very weird contrast that somebody who wants to return to nature does the most artificial thing in existence, which is to put language from thought, or put thought into language and then artificially mold it into meter and lines over an extended narrative, which is itself a social convention based down through various societies and mitigated through language. Then war
is much more proximate to nature.
Exactly. Just giving vent to impulse, but between moral agents. In some ways, I don't like what it could justify, but I wonder if that's part of. I mean, it's off. This is obviously going back to Rome. This is obviously very Iliadic, having a giant battle like this, but is it also extremely romantic in the way that Romanticism may itself be a form of justification, or part of its ramifications may be a justification for moral imperialism.
I have a lot of thoughts, but one is of the Romantics, he's the only one who actually saw any combat. I mean, Shelley dies at sea. Keats dies of tuberculosis at 26. Wordsworth and Coleridge, no. This dude, whoever this other guy is, I don't remember his name now. The Goldilocks guy, no. Blake, no. Yeah, none of these guys are seeing any combat. I'm interested in this idea. I don't know if it's even a pushback, but it's more just like another step on this idea, is that the act of writing is artificial, but it is also rational. Whereas war and combat are animalistic, which isn't to say that's not part of humanity, but it's more primitive. Using language would be higher order.
Yeah, it's a part of our animal existence, but
Yeah.
it's what makes us human.
No. I mean, I take your point. It's interesting. I mean, he peppers Caesar. He starts this section with a quote from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. He peppers Caesar in throughout. He mentions references the Iliad. But I mean, like, yes, this is clearly aiming at exactly what you're saying. The question of why is he making this argument that war is a much more romantic pursuit than writing about shepherds in nature?
Arcadia ego 8 est.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, no,
Yeah.
because I'm about to jump off and just make my other little small point.
No, 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 that's fine. That was good.
Something I should have brought up right at the beginning, so I'm really good at doing this at the end, is that there's a tremendous epic correlate to Don Juan taking drag and becoming Don Juana for a while. In particular, Achilles very famously took on female dress prior to going to the
Oh
Iliad
yeah, of course.
or to Troy at his mother's whim, and in fact, that is included in the one book epic, the Achillead by Statius, the Roman poet
Cool.
who is in Dante's Purgatory. Um, and that's what happens because he dies after the first book and doesn't finish it, and sadly. But so Achilles very famously really fit in among the women because he was so beautiful. Um, but disguise in the epic is something, and how, and I think this is tied to the relationship between Don Juan and Lord Byron, and whether one is a mask for the other or a mouthpiece for the other. But disguise in epics, that is a large theme. Odysseus, of course, is a master of disguise, and in fact feigned insanity prior to going to Troy, and but also is so good at dressing up as a beggar that he got a bath from Helen. We learn from Helen in book when she tells his son in book 4 of the Odyssey, very very awkwardly. But also in the Aeneid, the gods are often in disguise, but Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, Cupid takes his form and sits in the lap of Dido, and she just falls in love with him. But these, I'm not trying to make a Joseph Campbell masks of God point necessarily so much as just to mention that there's definitely a correlate or a connection to Achilles in dressing and passing as a woman in an epic poem, but also that might be just part of a broader theme of disguise and effective disguise and what that means. Maybe in all of literature, but definitely in epic poetry.
One thing that this Wes mentioned it, I don't know if it's last time or the time before, but that this is like almost like well, I shouldn't say almost. He says he's going to start at the beginning, the origin story of Juin. So if he's this rakish nihilist, how does he become one?
Yes.
And all these steps, you could see them in. He has an affair with a married woman, seemingly from her choice. He's kind of forced into that. It doesn't go well. He's kicked out of town. So there's this sort of traumatic event there. He lands on this, survives cannibalism, lands on this island. His woman that he basically wants to marry, her father sells him off into slavery, and she dies in childbirth. He then is forced to become a woman, so he understands or potentially understands their perspective. He understands women having power. He understands women having power over him, over his own body. Then he sees war. In war, he tries to save it. Like all these parts, you can see essentially an element of his goodness, except for maybe the first experience, being corrupted or being tarnished. And you can see how he could become someone who has seen some stuff and now does not care or is willing to bend moral rules or is um,
Mhm.
thinking about morality in a grander scale than a vow of marriage.
They're really
Yeah,
making.
but
Yeah, sorry, Wes, please.
just real quick, I mean, I think part of Byron's argument, I don't know how ironic he's being, is that he's not a rake and he's not nihilistic, right?
Yeah,
Like that's what they say he
yeah,
is.
Ah,
yeah,
And he wants to say, no, I have these feelings, man. Like I have,
yeah,
come on. So
yeah.
just to interject.
No, no, I'm saying that all based on the fact that an assumption that by the end of the book he would become this rake, but so
Yeah.
far nothing has happened. Like I know the myth of Don John, Don Juan, Don Juan, Don Giovanni, all this kind
we
of,
should
but
watch
like,
Don John too to add to our list.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's also Don Juan DeMarco. That's another famous one from the early
Oh,
90s. That's a great one.
okay.
Johnny Depp, Marlon Brando.
Oh wow. Well, I mean,
Yeah. Um, So, anyways, yeah.
Well,
But Wes, yes, I don't say anything. I just said to discount exactly that point of like, no, 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 no. I'm just misunderstood. This character's
right,
misunderstood. I'm misunderstood.
right.
that really makes me wonder about the question of integrity, because on the one hand, yeah, right. When you've gone through a lot of things, it seems like you earn the right to act however you want to act because you sort of see the relativity of everything
Hmm.
and in a way that other people can't. And so, of course, you would act differently. And so, but from the opposite point of view, it's almost like that is maintaining one's integrity through all of things rather than becoming codified in one's way of seeing things. That the way that the romantic maintains integrity is by not codifying and by continuing to live a non-standard or an existence that is pure and uncorrupted by society and convention as possible. Um, and so to some extent that seems like an end point, right? When you're like, somebody's been through so much, they're just going to be different. But it might also be just the whole thing running throughout that it is that desire, at least by the author here, to represent a character who is in constant flux, and having epic level adventures and experiences, and that there's a that might be the least harmful way to one's own native sense of self as an existence can be. And that might particularly be helped by being with people not from one's home. So to Wes's point, affirming the cosmopolitan, like perhaps
Hmm.
cosmopolitan is very
Hmm.
valuable in keeping you from becoming your parents or like the people that you were raised with, because these people are very different.
And testing your own concrete identity. What are the things that you really truly believe? Because that's, he's a pretty virtuous character.
The
He
12th
ha
book told us,
he
but yes, no.
he has this affair, and then other than that, I can't think of one unvirtuous act he's done.
I've seen a lot worse in epic, even heroes.
Yeah.
Achilles dragged a dude through the dirt in front of his parents and wife,
Hmm. Hmm.
in a way that nobody had ever done, as far as we knew. Eternal return accepted. Um, but I just have to make a meta comment really quickly. I am not loving reading this. It's poetry. It's not just beautiful poetry. It's long, epic poetry. But the conversations really bring it to another level for me. And there's a very St. John's, very seminar experience to be like, okay, this book, I wonder if it'll do the trick. And it's like, yeah, no, that was the book's just the stone to some extent.
I think this book is way better than Endymion.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Fair.
I am also enjoying it way more than War and Peace. And the other thing I'm thinking about is I mentioned that he's like Slothrop from Gravity's Rainbow. This is a very similar story.
He does get carried by fate as well. You're right.
I
He
mean,
doesn't have
it's picaresque. He's carried by fate. He hasn't really had a ton of sex, but that's a major part. Is that Slothrop is like led by his dick around Europe. But but I'm I if you guys said you know, I think we've kind of gotten the idea, and I've heard that the rest isn't as good. I would say, okay, that's fine. But if you said I want to read more, I'd read more. I'm enjoying it.
I'm so curious what's going to happen, and I'm dreading that it's going to end like Gravity's Rainbow, where nothing really happens.
Uh,
Although I didn't get to the end of that book, I like for me, it's going to end with me feeling like I didn't get something from this. Um, but I agree that the more you think about this poem, the more interesting it gets. Like I think you could read it, and this is like video games too, right? You could play the video game and just like play through it or whatever. But if you like kind of dwell on like what's up with this, and I continue to be amazed at the just the verve and the wild like rhymes and challenges that this poet sets himself and how fast, like at a clip, he's writing this, you know, and he doesn't seem to have a plan. Like he's just flying by the seat of his pants. That's the
Yeah.
impression I get. It's quite exciting, you know. It's fun. So I'm happy to keep reading it.
it's
We're almost done, right?
it's cool to see a risk being
Yeah.
taken by an author and not just to make, I mean, to make an artistic point and also a skill point. You know, there's something to be said for the skill work of art that demonstrates capacity. And he does seem to be eager to be judged like that. So I'm looking at now at the table of contents in our edition. We have just finished 8. If we were to go to 13, but not through it, so from 9 through 12, that would be close to 100 pages. If we went to 13, I think that is about 100
Oh,
pages, or through 13, that would be a little bit more. But we did a pretty long reading for this time. Well, we'll sign off really quickly and then we'll just hash this out.
Okay.
goodbye, everybody.